Hey everyone, we're Nick
and Rachel.
If you're new here and you haven't been following our adventures up to now, you'll typically find us vlogging about our travels around the world. But this series of videos is a little bit different. And the reason that we are bringing these about is because as we've gone through each of the countries that we visited, we've noticed that there are certain things that are a bit different to what we're used to in the UK and Canada.
The reason that we have this channel is to share our travel experiences in the hopes of inspiring others to travel more. With that, we want to share some tips and tricks we've picked up along the way in each of the countries that we have traveled to, so that if you also want to go to the same places, you'll be armed with hopefully some helpful information that will help in planning your trip and navigating around a little bit easier once you're there.
Today's video is going to be focusing on travel around Guatemala. If you've been watching our videos, then you'll know that we visited Panajachel, San Juan, Antigua, and Flores during our time there. While a number of the pointers that we're going to be giving you today are to do with those places, the rest of them will be about the country as a whole.
We hope that you find them useful. The water in Guatemala is not potable. However, bottled water is cheap and very easy to purchase at grocery stores and convenience stores, so not to worry. We also found that a lot of the places we were staying had either water filters or the huge canisters of filtered water, so like water dispensers available to us free of charge, so we were able to just continuously refill reusable water bottles.
One thing that we always mention whenever we go to a different country is the food, and Guatemala is no exception. The food is absolutely divine, and it is also worth noting for any coffee and chocolate lovers out there that this is a place where they actually grow it in the country. So if you want to have some of the best quality coffee or chocolate, then this is an amazing place for it. In terms of more traditional dishes, then actually they're traditional breakfasts, which end up being more like breakfast tacos, as well as churrasco, ceviche, and pupusas should all be sampled during your time there. And typically for more local restaurants, then you can get very affordable prices. So you should not miss out on an opportunity to try any of these.
The currency in Guatemala is the quetzal, and aside from really big ticket items like maybe a tour or an excursion, which could be offered in US dollars, the only currency they really accept there is the quetzal, so you need to make sure that you have that on you. There's not seemingly any rhyme or reason to where they accept cash versus card. You'll find that some grocery stores accept card while other grocery stores don't. Same with convenience stores, cafes, and restaurants. You'd be surprised at how some of the local places that you wouldn't typically expect do accept credit card. So it's really quite varied. Therefore, our suggestion is to always have some quetzals on you, but also you can use your credit card in some places. So just kind of a good mix of both.
When we were thinking of transport options to get around the country, the more we researched, the more we found that our options were somewhat limited. We were told that there may be security issues if we try to drive through the country ourselves. Public transport is kind of limited. There is such a thing as a chicken bus, but we'd had some major safety issues with regards to that. And equally, when we consulted Uber and InDrive and the usual other rideshare options that we found around Latin America, then there just really weren't any available rides for us to take. So it kind of left us a little bit thin on the ground. However, when we did a little bit more of a look into it, we found out that as a tourist, you can book what is known as a shuttle bus to get you from point A to point B, and they will stop at all of the major tourist towns and cities in the country. So this is the one that we would recommend for you. Another thing to note is that you can actually book these somewhat ahead of time. Between booking online and booking in person, it's exactly the same price, and if you want to, then you can actually pay in USD over quetzals in this particular instance. and you can pay with credit card, which is definitely an added bonus. The company that we ended up going through, and I think this is one of the more popular ones, is called Atitrans. And they basically took us between each of the different cities that we ended up visiting while we were in Guatemala. And by going through them, even if you have to transfer to a different kind of bus in a different kind of city, they take care of it basically end to end for you so that you don't have to worry about it. As far as we were concerned, everything usually ran on time, if not a little bit early. And actually, the costs were pretty affordable, especially when you compared it to maybe an internal flight or something like that. The only thing to bear in mind is that unlike other services in other countries where they sometimes take you door to door, the expectation is that you will be picked up and dropped off at the Atitrans offices in the respective locations that you're planning on traveling between. So therefore, if you are planning out an itinerary, then just factor in maybe an extra walk or an extra taxi as you try and get to your accommodation in the new place that you're planning on visiting.
One of the major tourist attractions in Guatemala is to go to Lake Atitlan. And when you're at Lake Atitlan, there are basically a number of small towns or villages dotted around this lake. And it's pretty hard to choose which one to stay in because they all offer something a little bit different while being similar. So one of the more popular things to do in Lake Atitlan is to village hop or town hop between them and just spend maybe a day exploring a few of them. Now, how to get to each town is interesting. Some of them are accessible by land between each other. For example, the main town, if you're coming in by shuttle bus, is called Panajachel. And from there, you can get to one of the neighboring towns by land by tuk-tuk. Similarly, if you're on the other side of the lake in either San Pedro or San Juan, you can get between those two by tuk-tuk. And of course, you're going to have to negotiate a price, and it might be different on the ride there versus the ride back. There's no standardized pricing. However, there are also boats that go between each of the towns, and that does have standardized pricing. However, it might be a little bit more expensive depending on which towns you're trying to get between. So it's kind of good to weigh your option between a boat or a tuk-tuk. Now, if you do choose to go by boat, then you can buy a return ticket and save a little bit of money that way. And the nice thing is that the return ticket doesn't have to be on that same day. I think we went from Panajachel to San Juan one day, and maybe 2 or 3 days later, we were going to come back and we were able to get that return ticket price. You just have to ask for it because I don't think they freely advertise that it's not a same day thing. If you're hoping to use ride shares to get in between towns, we were able to do that once, but there's just not that many drivers, so I definitely wouldn't count on that. The other option is, of course, a car rental, but we have touched on the security issue of renting a car and driving it around before. I think that will end up being in the future something that a lot of tourists choose to do, just kind of similar to in Costa Rica.
One of the main things that there is to do around Lake Atitlan, aside from checking out the towns and villages, is to hike up volcanoes. And two of the major routes that you may have heard of are Indian Nose and San Pedro. Indian Nose was one that we ended up taking up, and honestly, it was a pretty amazing experience. The hiking was quite intense, but the views that you end up getting of the sunrise over Lake Atitlan is absolutely second to none, and we could not recommend it highly enough. San Pedro, on the other hand, though, is one that we ended up getting a little bit put off by. When we were talking to our Airbnb host, who, as it turned out, was also a tour guide, and he was the one who took us up Indian Nose, basically said that we should not do it when we were talking about the possibility of going up San Pedro. And he basically relayed a story whereby when a group of tourists went up to the summit of the volcano, they were met by a group of bandits, all in balaclavas, wielding guns and machetes, and they basically beat one of the tourists half to death, stole all their possessions. The tour guides were also not safe, and they had their possessions taken as well. And while we wanted to believe that this was just a one-off incident, It turns out when we were doing a little bit further research later on that actually this was kind of a typical thing and there seems to be a pattern. And while there was technically some security midway up the volcano, it wasn't 100% effectual. And so therefore you may have needed to actually pay for your own private security to go up. And even then, there's no guarantee that you still won't be affected by this. Despite all of the security risks, as well as the additional cost for paying for the extra security and things like that, there are actually some tour operators that will still take you up for quite a lot of money. However, because of the aforementioned security risks, then they will only take you halfway up the volcano before bringing you back down because they don't want to run into the bandits. So with that, this is just something that we want you to bear in mind. However, another thing that we do also want you to bear in mind, just for the sake of balance, is that actually Acatenango used to have the same problems, and we did that with absolutely zero problems because they cleaned that up within the last 5 to 10 years to make it tourist safe. What we are reading right now is that apparently the new mayor around that area is actually stepping in to try and clean up that experience to make it better and safer for tourists. So it is very possible that within a year or two of this video being released, it may be perfectly fine and we may just be giving you a pointer for nothing. For now anyway, we would just say exercise caution and make sure you do your own research.
The one hike around Lake Atitlan that we can highly recommend to you is the Indian Nose hike. And typically most people will do this for sunrise as you get really fantastic views over all of Lake Atitlan, as well as the towns that are littered around the lake. This hike is very safe and straightforward in the sense that you just need a guide to go with you, especially if you choose to do the longer trail, which is the trail you can access from the town of San Juan. However, if you choose to do the shorter trail, which is about 45 to 50 minutes long, then you do need to be driven to it or drive yourself to it. I don't think you need a guide for that one, although there are certainly a ton of tour operators who take tour groups up the shorter way. In fact, I would say we were maybe one of 2 groups who went up the longer way. I think it's far more common to do the shorter route. The shorter trail, and we know this because we hiked back down the shorter trail, is very well marked. There are a lot of stairs, it's wide, it's very well cleared, whereas the longer trail, which we did on the way up, is very rugged through dense forest that is kind of overgrown in certain places. The trail is very steep. There are rocks and tree roots on it, and in certain places, you're getting really close to the edge of the mountain or volcano. So for the longer trail, you would most definitely want a tour guide, not least because of the fact that the trail is not well marked itself. However, we are so happy that we did the longer route. It was just a really good experience, and I don't think we would have got the same thrill or sense of accomplishment had we done the shorter trail. And so it was worth getting up extra early and putting all that intense effort in. But just make sure, regardless of which route you take, bring a ton of water so you stay hydrated and maybe a few snacks for along the way. That all being said, when you get to the top, they have coffee and hot chocolate as well as bread waiting for you, and it's just kind of included in your entrance price for the hike. So you will get to fuel up at the top. However, especially if you're doing the longer hike, just make sure you have a few snacks along the way, because doing that on an empty stomach at 3 in the morning can be a challenge. And yeah, just bring lots of water, but it's totally worth it to do. And when we went, I believe we paid 150 quetzal per person. So hopefully that gives you a rough idea of what you should be paying.
One of the other major hikes that you can do in Guatemala is Acatenango, which is an incredible volcano hike and an experience that genuinely we're never going to forget. Because it is very popular and with good reason, then there are a lot of tour operators that take you up there, and all of those are based in Antigua. So it is definitely a good idea to make sure that you book a stay in Antigua, at least to bookend your trip up there, because you're going to need it. In terms of the different tour operators, then they all seem to offer different things at different price points. And so it is really worth making sure that you research exactly what is included and what you think you're going to need before really investing in this, because this is going to be quite intense, all things considered. It is going to be a pretty drastic incline over the course of the best part of a day. So you need to make sure that you are going to be with a company that you can be reliant on. We had heard really good things about the company that we went with, called OX Expeditions. They included a lot of stuff, including a pre-meeting before we even set off on the expedition, a bunch of rental gear, breakfast before we went up, all meals while we were on the expedition, including putting us up in a base camp with cabins, which we ended up sharing with other people. And fundamentally, it was just an overall really, really positive experience that we ended up having with them. As far as value for money goes, we feel like we really got our money's worth. And so that would be our recommendation. But we do understand that not everybody's like us. So if you want to explore your options, then we insist that you do ahead of time. Just a couple of pointers though. Unless you are a super fit person with legs of steel, then generally speaking, you are going to be very grateful for the idea of having breaks between everything. The good news is that pretty much every half an hour, there are break stations as you go up the hike, which is fantastic. But definitely after a few hours, you are going to need to take a significant amount of rest. And so therefore, we would recommend that you do what we did and stay at a base camp before doing anything else. And the reason that we say this is because there are options to do the full hike in a day, go up and come down, but that's really for the super fit and extremely experienced hikers among you. Equally, if you're not 100% sure of your fitness level, then it is worth noting that you can pay, I think it was 200 quetzals per person, in order to have a porter take your bag for one leg of the journey, whether that was going up or coming down. We opted to go for a porter service to take our bags up, purely because we didn't have any real notion as to the impact that going up with a 25 plus pound bag would have on us. And I think actually it ended up being a really good decision for us because it meant we could enjoy the process of getting up the volcano a lot more. However, as a general rule, as mentioned, this is very intense. So you are going to want to stock up on fuel, whatever that looks like. So definitely making sure that you have plenty of water, electrolyte drinks, snacks, all of that kind of stuff is definitely good. If you end up going with the right company, then they will also provide you with snacks along the way, as well as meals. So they will also be very keen to keep you fueled. But certainly there will be a number of things that you should be bringing with you on your person, depending on your own needs. Another thing to mention is that no matter how fit you are, your legs are going to be really, really sore, either during the hike or after the hike. Ours, I think, basically took about a week to get over the entire experience. And that's considering the fact that we walk a lot of places and we had done a couple of hikes previously. So just let that be a barometer for the kinds of things that you need. But do not let any of this put you off. It is 100% an experience that if you are down for, you should 100% do. Fundamentally, you come away with some of the most breathtaking views that you will ever see and possibly one of the best experiences that you'll have in the whole of Central America.
Once you get to Flores, if you want to do any excursions or tours, such as to the ancient Mayan city of Tikal, or if you want to get transportation to another city, for example, if you want to go from Flores into San Ignacio, Belize, then all of those excursions as well as transports typically leave from the Yo Heart Peten side on the island of Flores. So that's just definitely something to bear in mind when you're booking accommodation to stay in Flores, because a lot of the transportation and excursions leave early in the morning. So you probably don't want to have to get up any earlier than you already have to.
If you do go to Tikal, and we thoroughly recommend that you do because it's absolutely amazing, then you're going to have an absolutely wonderful time. But just a couple of pointers. For one, you are in the middle of a rainforest. It is going to be really humid, irrespective of the time of year that you go. So you are going to probably sweat a lot. So your needs for hydration are going to be elevated in comparison to most other places in the world. Therefore, make sure that you take plenty of water and or other fluids as you need them. Another thing to mention, and we weren't quite prepared for this in the same way, is actually you are going to get eaten alive by biting insects. So be sure to take a handy can of bug spray so that you can spritz yourself throughout your visit, because you are definitely going to need it.
And that's the end of our list of tips and tricks for Guatemala. We hope that they have been useful and that you can apply them to your future travels. That all being said, we do recognize that this was not an exhaustive list. So if you have any suggestions or if you have any further questions, then please leave us a comment below.
Until next time though, take care.
And keep smiling.